Okay. Um, well, thank you everyone for joining today. Thank you to our panelists for joining as well. My name's Brenna. I am the current president of SciPol Detroit, and I'm excited to welcome you all to our first event of 2024. So I'd like to briefly introduce Dr. Calais Prince and Professor Noah Hall. I'd like to give you both a minute to introduce yourselves. So Dr. Prince, if you could get started just with a quick introduction.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Calais Prince. Most recent position was Associate Director of Science and Health Policy at the American Association for Cancer Research. My pronouns are she, hers, and my PhD is in cellular biology.
Awesome. Thank you. And Professor Hall, go ahead.
Hi guys, I'm Noah Hall. I'm a environmental lawyer and professor here at Wayne State. Um, Not a doctor. Lawyers are definitely not doctors and do not have the education of Callie or most of you folks. Yeah, I practice environmental law and I don't recognize any of you folks from 5700, but I'll mention that when we get a chance to.
Awesome. I've heard lots of good feedback about that class from students I've had, so definitely a good place to give it a shout out. But today we've prepared a couple of questions just to get a feel for sort of your career paths, because I think all of us here today are really excited to hear about how you sort of got to the position that you have had most recently, and what wisdom you can share for us students to kind of repeat all the successes that you've had so far. So I'm going to run through some questions that we have prepared as a SciPol team, and then hopefully around 4:30 or a little afterwards, we'll open the floor to questions. So if you're listening, please drop questions in the chat. Someone will sort of keep tabs on those, but we will probably wait until later to voice those. You're welcome to put them in the chat, or once we open the floor, if you want to unmute yourselves and say hi and ask your question, please feel free to do so. We'll call on you.
Brenna, could maybe I'm sorry I don't know this and I don't know how a good way to do it, but it would really help me to know a little bit more about you guys. If
Yeah.
if there is a short you guys collectively, like at least where you guys are in school and what most of you are looking at. Yeah.
Definitely. I think we can totally take time now, just take a couple minutes. If folks who are listening can drop maybe their major and their grade, for lack of a better word, or your degree program if
Yeah.
you're a graduate student. But yeah, I think that would maybe give us that's a great context to put this conversation in.
Yeah, and if it's not immediately apparent from your major, if you're um if you're interested in studying more in kind of hard sciences, or if you're doing more work at the intersections of policy, it helps me to know a little bit about your backgrounds.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So yeah, I'd encourage folks to put that in the chat right now if you can. So your grade level, your major, and then yeah, if you're maybe interests, whether that's research, policy, really anything between the two of those two things, which aren't closely connected all the time. But we can have that in the chat to kind of reference, or if you're more comfortable unmuting yourselves, I think everyone should be able to do that. So if you want to jump on your microphone, please do so.
This is super interesting and helpful already, although not helpful in that there's not much of a generalization.
That's I guess I can give you a little context
Yeah,
about
wow, wow.
SciPol Detroit. We
From
were,
undergrad,
yeah.
PhD, from lab nerds to people doing policy. This is
Mhm.
okay. Great. Wow.
Yeah.
And like everything from what I would consider like yeah, neuroscience and medicine to the more environmental stuff. Yeah, wow. All right, this is like the full range of everything. So I get my classes too.
Yeah. I will say we don't have, and someone from the call on this call right now will probably prove me wrong, but we don't have a lot of pre-law students in our organization. But we're trying to reach those students more. So I would love maybe know if you have any insights on how we might connect with those students more. It would probably uh, be able to teach us a few things.
Yeah, we get into that. Well, I think I'm pretty much caught up now. Wow.
Okay.
Looks like Taylor is at least the only one who I think I'm spotting pretty quickly is considering even going to law school. So is not just looking at this as kind of hearing from a lawyer as a science or a policy person. All right, awesome. Hi, Taylor. Great, awesome. Wow, you guys are an incredible bunch.
Great.
Wow. All right. Now why don't you just continue with your program and I'll participate as planned.
No, I appreciate that. That was a good way to get us started. Um, but yeah, we'll move forward with some of the questions because I think we have a lot of
Also, by the way, like if ever I need a doctor, I'm calling this crew over here. This is incredible.
Don't call me Noah. I can't help with emergencies.
No, I mean,
yeah.
okay, fine, but some of these people, like, this is incredible. This is great. I mean, I only joke about like, being a biochemist or a neuroscientist is like, that's a lawyer's way of joking around about a really smart science person. And that's actually what Christina and this is, all right, let's do it.
There's a lot of diverse thinkers here for sure. So we all have a lot to learn from each other, which is why I'd say this is such a fun group to be a part of. But yeah, so Noah, if you want to start us off, can you briefly describe your educational background and career path that's brought you to this point?
I can very briefly, because I'm not saying this modestly. I have less higher education than a lot of these comments as I'm like trying to catch up with them. I I studied environmental science as an undergraduate. Really interested in forestry was my was what was motivating me, and expanded that into a lot of work on freshwater. Obviously, just based on where I am, and during undergraduate, I kind of made the career decision that I didn't really like my options of going into work in forestry or even freshwater science at the time. This was in the 90s, and essentially being a forester whose job is to chop down trees or to work for the government and administer the chopping down of trees. I wanted to be more of a participant, I guess, was how I viewed it. I wanted to be, yeah, I looked at my degree program of forestry as very much being just your job was to implement somebody else's plans and values. And I wanted to participate in shaping plans and values. So I went directly into law school from undergraduate, planning to do environmental law, and that's what I did. And it ended up, I mean, then if you want to talk about careers after education, we do that. But the education part of what I chose to do is really, I'm not being modest, is less higher education than most of you. I did undergraduate in 3 years, just with a summer time at a summer biology station. And law school is 3 years, coursework only, no thesis, and that's it. And then you graduate, and there's no, there's no system like in medicine of internships and residencies. And when you graduate and you become a lawyer, you have an infinite amount to learn, but you are as qualified as anybody from the Chief Justice to the State Attorney General.
Thanks, Noah. I think if you want to share more about your career path, because I feel like you're selling yourself short with the mention of your degrees. We know you've, I
So
have
yeah,
so
I agree
much.
with that,
I
Brenda.
don't want to cut off order. If Callie's doing education next, or I could go into career after that. it is a little different when you do law, I think, than some of the other more more degreed professions, because really your career development starts after you graduate law school. You don't
Mhm.
you don't do a lot in law school towards your career. Law school is a pretty standardized curriculum. The first year is entirely standardized, and even your second and third year are it's a very traditional, a very old traditional profession, and the education is pretty standard. When I graduated, I had a very clear sense of what I wanted to do. I wanted to um, uh, run and really make my own environmental organization to work on environmental issues the way I wanted to do them. That might sound like super, in my own head, but I think it's pretty typical in law, that it's a participant sport. So I graduated. I did some of the standard career things as an environmental lawyer. I clerked for a Supreme Court, and I worked at a big corporate law firm. But after only about 3 years, 2 or 3 years after graduating law school, I was basically able to do what I had dreamed or intended or planned to do. First, I managed environmental organizations, and then I founded my own environmental organization, and uh, and have really had the opportunity to be involved in. It's been really kind of a blessing. I feel like I've just been able to be involved in so many of the difficult and maybe important environmental issues that have gone on as a lawyer. I did a lot of work writing laws to protect the Great Lakes, um, uh, writing policies that became laws protecting the Great Lakes. I was able to represent a lot of environmental organizations and even governments in some uh, uh, environmental cases on things like climate change and invasive species. Um, and I think maybe most fundamentally, as an environmental lawyer, what I've really done my whole career is what's now called environmental justice. For environmental lawyers, it's sort of a new way of framing what we've always done, which is essentially try to achieve at least our client's view of justice in a very unjust system. And that's always been a huge part of my work, representing everything from community groups to individuals who've been harmed, or whose how we broadly define the environment in their life has been harmed, and fighting for them in court and in the political system. And most recently, I was the special prosecutor on the Flint water crisis under the prior Attorney General, not the current Attorney General. Um, and I was able to be involved in that work. All right, that's the long version, I think.
I appreciate it. I think that's really fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing, Noah. I would love to turn it over to you, Calais, if you can give us a little description of your educational background and your career path so far.
Sure. Before I get started, just wanted to say that Noah's work is absolutely admirable. And so, sir, you will not show up to a call with all these people and speak as if you have nothing to contribute. But so my educational background, like it wasn't necessarily this clear path. I went to undergrad at Purdue University and I started there in animal science because as a child I wanted to become a veterinarian or an ice skater. And I started volunteering at clinics in high school, and I wasn't very passionate about it, but I just thought that it was like the location. Like maybe it's because I'm at this small animal clinic, you know, maybe I should go to a large animal clinic. And I did that. I was like, I still don't like this. And so at Purdue, in undergrad, animal science and taking all of the basic science courses in the labs and everything. And your junior year, you're expected to apply to veterinary school. And at this point, I volunteered at Purdue's large animal hospital. I worked in two different departments in a small animal hospital. And it's like, oh, this is not for me, but I'm kind of late in the game. What am I supposed to do? And so I reached out to one of my professors. He's a reproductive physiologist, and I said, I don't want to go to vet school, but I don't really know what's available for me. And he asked if I considered research. And I was like, not really, no. And so that summer is when I started working in his laboratory. And that was my first time outside of the, traditional lab setting where I'm working with samples from pigs off the farm. I'm like sucking oocytes out of ovaries and doing, immunocytochemistry and making sense of all the work that I put in to his lab. Like things started making sense to me. And I was also interested in abnormal behavior. And so I expanded my psychology degree into behavioral neuroscience, and started doing research with neuroscientists and behavioral neuroscientists at Purdue University. And so following undergrad, I then went to UT Health Science Center in San Antonio for my PhD in cellular biology. My dissertation itself is focused on the impact of maternal obesity on placenta function. And as I continue to mature as a professional, I recognize that interdisciplinary work was interesting to me. Health policy was interesting to me. Addressing disparities, but at the time I didn't have the language for it. It's just like, I know I want to do something important. I don't know what that is though. Or recognizing as, I'm gathering placenta from women that participate in our study. In San Antonio, the majority of the population is Hispanic. And it's like, I knew that if I got tissues from, non-Hispanic Black women, I couldn't include them in my cohort. Like there wasn't a representative population for me to include them in my study. And so it's not as if minority health wasn't a priority, that it wasn't important to me. It's just that if you're not in an environment that allows you to have an impact on the population you're interested in, you can't really do much about it until you leave that environment. And so even though as a graduate student, I knew I wanted to branch out, I still had it in my mind, like I have to do a postdoc somewhere. And so I interviewed for postdocs a couple of different institutions, and I received an offer and accepted one at the National Institute on Aging. And during my time there, well, during the interview, younger Calais was very direct in that I let the PI know, I'm interested in policy. I can definitely work hard in your lab. I can work hard at the bench, but I need other things on my resume to prove that I can, work in other sectors. And so she's like, all right, as long as you come in here and beast it out, we're good. I was like, bet. And so we moved from San Antonio to Baltimore. The work I did at NIA, I was a part of the Handle study, Healthy Aging in Neighborhoods of Diversity Across the Lifespan. For those of you who don't know, Baltimore, when you consider disparities, like they're so vast, and it's comparable to a lot of other major cities where depending upon what your area code is, your life expectancy might decrease by 20, 30 years. And it's not due to, gang violence or things of that sort. And so it was more of learning learning how to speak about the impact of social structures on biological outcomes. And so during my time as a postdoc, I also completed a brief detail, which is essentially a specialized volunteering opportunity at the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities, where I had a better idea of like NIH's role in policy. Because in my mind, I was an intramural postdoc. I wasn't thinking about NIH as a whole. Like I know it's a big deal, but it's like, I don't know what this means. And so I was in one of their policy offices for a couple months because I was really far along in my pregnancy. I was also applying for AAAS policy fellowship. And after the postdoc and the day after I had my son, I learned that I placed at the U.S. Department of Defense, and I became a fellow. It's a really long title, but briefly, Health Affairs, where I was focusing on healthcare policy. Because a lot of times, at least it came up to me several times through that process, people asking, are you interested in science for policy or policy for science? And earlier on, I was very much, I'm interested in science for policy, because in my mind, like if you have the data, then you can make better decisions. That was, sweet, young, summer child, naive Calais. So, but it's as a mature professional, recognizing that sometimes these spheres aren't independent of each other. Like these are, overlapping. It's a Venn diagram, really. And so at Department of Defense, it also gave me an opportunity to understand that there's more to the military than just the big military. There are scientists that were working there. There are medical doctors who were working there, nurses, psychologists, psychiatrists, all of them working to make sure that, service members can be as healthy as they can be. My portfolio is focused on mental health, population health, and women's health. I was involved with not necessarily drafting DoD policy, but editing DoD policy as a scientist, because in terms of my skill set and having an understanding of, okay, who does this policy impact and why aren't we focusing on other groups? Like, why is this one population the standard when we see that diversity is increasing across the military? I was also instrumental in developing like some of the DEI efforts coming out of the Defense Health Agency, especially when it came to, drafting like a lot of the medical terminology and talking points for like some of their doctors when they're speaking to their patients. Like one example I can think of is when they're trying to describe intersectionality. And I read some of their definitions. I was like, oh, that's not what it is. so let me help you out. So this has not become policy. And it's, it's when it's there, it's there. And so following my time as a policy fellow at the Department of Defense, I accepted a position as Associate Director of Science and Health Policy at AACR. And, typically when people hear about that, they want to know what my day-to-day is like. And there's nothing consistent. Like, yes, you'll have deliverables that are consistent every year. Like, we have our annual progress reports, we have our special reports, we have, the variety of different conferences. We also engage Capitol Hill because we advocate for increased biomedical funding for biomedical research. So those big topics are consistent, but the way that you achieve those things can change from year on out. And so, I've authored chapters in our disparities report, I've authored chapters in our annual progress report, authored chapters in our COVID-19 cancer progress report. I've convened sessions at our annual meetings, at our disparities meeting. I engage with fellows at NCI, those who are interested in transitioning into policy. I work with our legislative affairs team to, advocate on Capitol Hill, like talking about the importance of funding biomedical research, but also engaging with those offices because we get draft legislation that they want our feedback on, because AACR is made up of, it's a membership organization. And so not only do we have to address the priorities of the members, we have to make sure it's in alignment with the organization in of itself. And one of the big projects I've been working on as of late focuses on electronic cigarettes, e-cigarettes, and ensuring that FDA has the money to regulate e-cigarettes, because currently the way that they do is through user fees, and in the books it's like 6 or so tobacco products that they can collect user fees from, but e-cigarettes isn't one of those products. And with it being a major part of the market share, it slows down their work to regulate it because they don't have the money to do it, and they're siphoning it from other products. So yeah, that's pretty much me in a pretty big nutshell. So.
Thank you. That was an awesome path. I love your,
because it goes everywhere. It's nothing
yeah.
It's not as if 8-year-old Calais didn't think this is where I would be, as a professional. And some of the most valuable lessons I learned along the way is being honest with myself when it's like, I know something's rubbing me the wrong way. And it's like, oh, I don't think I like this. Okay, now it's time to engage with my network to figure out, where do I go from here? Where do I go next? And how do I utilize my skill set to be of benefit to the team that I join? So.
That's such like valuable insight, I think, especially for all the students on the call, like to know that there's not one set path that you have to follow no matter what. Definitely listen to what you're feeling along the way. It's really important. Well, thank you both so much for those sort of lovely pathways that you've taken and for sharing them with us. I think maybe for you, Noah, if you can address kind of how things have changed over the course of your career in the policy space. Or I think also if you want to reflect more personally on how your outlook has changed over time, we'd love to hear about that.
Sure. And actually, maybe I'll also pile that on. The thing that I was sort of thinking about during Calais' background is a really big change. I'm guessing I'm a good chunk older than you, but a pretty big change since even when I went to school, and I went to a school of what was then called a School of Natural Resources and Environment, is how even just the concept of interdisciplinary went from being new and weird to the norm. And like when I was in school, you really, it would have been really weird for somebody who had these great lab research skills, or who had the capacity to be going into to even be considering vet school, to also be doing policy work and even the way you phrased it, actually, of saying that, like, you wanted to think about the policy implications of your research, was radically interdisciplinary when I was in school compared to now. And I think that's one really, really big change. I mean, I see it day to day in my I just see your curriculums. I see the majors and the minors you put together, and how the fields and the professions have changed since I went to school in the early 90s. And I think that is just one huge and generally very good change, is just how interdisciplinary has become the norm. Yeah, I think also there's a challenge then of making sure in your education you develop like a skill set you also develop a skill set to go with your interdisciplinary thinking and approach, and maybe even ultimate interdisciplinary work and ruling of the world. Usually before you could get there, as I think we were both sharing, you do have to hone some specific professional skills and balance that with becoming an interdisciplinary master of the world. Like, in my work, you have to be like, you want to be a really good, competent lawyer before you get in the business of writing laws for other people. A huge change in the work also in over my years has been, I think, how more inclusive it's gotten in every sense. And I don't just very much in the traditional DEI sense, but it's also become far more inclusive, I think, frankly, of things like business and financial type work. Environmental interdisciplinary work has really expanded into that. I don't do it, but it's a big part of it. Yeah. And then I don't know. I don't want to sound too optimistic, because actually hard part of this work for me and doing it is the big thing that has not changed, which is essentially the tremendous challenge of living in harmony with each other and the environment. I don't feel like in my professional lifetime, for all, I think we've still left up to your generation the very fundamental challenging work of figuring out how to live, more peacefully with our environment, human and not. And I guess the optimistic way to phrase that is that, we've left a lot of work and decisions for you guys. So I guess that's the positive of it. We've not created a solution with all of the work we've done.
Well, yeah, there are a lot of us on the call, I'm sure, who are interested in helping that along, helping address those solutions or try and find them. So we appreciate that insight. Thank you, Noah. Calais, do you have anything to share on, I think you touched on this a little bit in your background, but if you've got any other thoughts about how things have changed since you first kind of entered the policy space?
It's That's kind of tricky for me to answer, um, because things continue to move all the time. And so I think if I pivot a little bit, instead of addressing the policy space overall, I think I can answer more to like, how have I been able to integrate into this space? Because I kind of had to let go of because again, like when I think about some of the preconceived notions I had about becoming a scientist, it was very much, undergrad, graduate, postdoc, R1 funded lab. And so learning that and accepting, especially like in the health policy space, like things aren't necessarily that rigid. And to see professionals, for example, when I was at the DOD, the number of higher ups who would leave for a little bit and then come back to a higher role, like that was foreign to me, because in my head, like you find your position and you're there for until you retire, and to recognize that that's typically not the case, at least in the DC area, and wrapping my head around that and understanding the importance of always having your finger to the pulse, because things, they don't stop moving. They don't stop changing. There are some things that have been consistent, or some things that typical topics that'll flare up. But yeah, I don't know if I have any particular insight that anyone can take away from me, especially when it comes to the field, but it's like, just be ready to hold on. Make sure
I
your
think
shoes have grip on them.
yeah.
I actually have I got like a kind of a really mechanical additional answer to all that maybe it helps stating the obvious for curriculum stuff. But GIS didn't exist when I was in school. And um, the especially I think the intersection of public information and technology has really changed a lot of our day-to-day work. I mean, really what used to require, hours and hours and FOIA, and I mean, the combination of of technology and how it's affected what citizens know and expect to know about their environment has been a pretty cool change to watch. And yeah.
Thank you. That's a great point. I think that's something, as someone who's been in school in recent years, that the accessibility of certain technology is definitely something we take for granted. But that hopefully we can, yeah.
I'm like, he's right. That wasn't around all the
Yeah, I mean, even to like, think about like we were, in the early 90s, I was in school with this guy who's amazing, Bunyan Bryant, who's like he was one of the first people who coined the idea of environmental injustice. And he had this like radical like academic thing that he was going to prove that pollution, was different on different sides of the dotted line, by zip code,
Mhm.
which is of course now not only common sense, but you go on the EPA website and you look at your zip code and you see, your environmental, like what was like a very challenging way of looking at our both justice and environmental laws 30 years ago has now become, with technology, like an obvious truth that people sort of demand access and fixes to. It's been I'm trying to be hopeful, guys, because a lot of it's really bad news. I mean, you could really say that in effect we've just learned more and more about we've learned more details about the harm and the problems, and our wisdom and emotional intelligence does not seem to be providing much of solutions. So
We're trying, like you said, with all the data we have available, maybe we'll be the folks that have the or have better luck with the science informing policy, like Calais said. That's a
And
tough
because
spot to
typically, like, it's sometimes it can be daunting when you
hmm
reflect on the impact of things. But again, like if you don't talk about it, if it's not acknowledged, you can't really do anything about it.
hmm
And this is the time of not acknowledging. Like you can't really, like if you ignore it, like you have to work hard to ignore it. Like,
Yeah.
you have to be actively working to ignore everything that's going on. So
Yes. Yes. We'll be in your office reminding you about it, hopefully. Um, okay, I feel like I could have this conversation for hours and hours with you too. This is so interesting, but I want to definitely take a moment to ask the audience if anybody has any questions, please unmute yourselves and share, or if you want to drop a question in the chat. We have about 20 more minutes to continue this discussion. We'd love to make sure we're, asking the questions that you folks are most interested in. Oh, great. Noor, yeah, if you want to unmute yourself, please go for it.
Hi everyone. So I'm Noor and I'm a first year PhD student in developmental psychology. And I'm really interested in like applied research and um, sometimes I think about being a faculty, but then given the situation with like higher education, it might not be possible. So my other alternatives would be like looking for other positions like in governmental agencies or nonprofits that support like how science can lead policy. But my problem is like I'm not like sure like the title or like what to search for, you know? So I was wondering, do you guys have some terms or titles or labels that I can like use to search online and see what my options are?
so the challenge with that is it will vary across the board. So for example, during my time as a policy fellow at DoD, I was a health policy analyst, but that didn't necessarily reflect what I was doing every day. Even as associate director of science and health policy, like that title in and of itself doesn't necessarily reflect everything I'm doing. And so it it can be a little tricky because it's not as if there's a boilerplate like this, if you want to become an analyst for EPA, this is what you need, like it's kind of tricky. So what I've done, so for example, USA Jobs, if you go to USA Jobs and type in the organs, like if you're typing in the agency you're interested in, and then like reading through those position descriptions, that could be a good place to start. If there's a particular nonprofit you're interested in, like going to their career pages and seeing what they have posted and available and seeing if what they seek in that particular role, that those are skills that you have, then go for it. But I would say a cold search just may not be the best at this stage, but it might help. Like, okay, if you want to be at USAID, then either USA Jobs, or like their actually website which will take you to USA Jobs, I would say. But no, those titles they're tricky, Nor. So, I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Maggie. Oh,
It's easier for me to say this as a lawyer than for the applied research field, nor that you're looking at. But lawyers and often can just create the job for themselves if you're not seeing, just because you don't see what you want out there. Um, I don't want to give advice to somebody in a different profession and it not make sense. But in legal work, making your own job is pretty normal. And so if you have a clear vision of what you want, or even a half-baked vision of what you want, and you don't see it out there, start your own. It's what a lot of us do.
I mean, you can do that in the STEM space, but you just gotta either have a spouse to support you in some capacity or a side hustle in the meantime. Like there, so for example, out in in terms of like the AAAS network, like I know of individuals who's, they have either become consultants or they work for consulting firm. Like the sky's the limit. It's just really a matter of who you are, what you want to achieve. How does that align? How do your professional goals? How does that align with who you are as a member of a family? like where I am in my stage, I don't particularly have an interest in becoming a consultant or starting my own company. But if that's your deal, then it's like, okay, well, how do you build that network to get you to that next space? So some of it really is just like either going to the agency, come up with their own plan, but also building a network to help you get there and having tenacity continue forward if it's really what you want to do.
Calais, I think that's a great answer, and I know your feedback's like really significant too. Calais, could you maybe just quickly describe what the AAAS fellowship is for those who might not be familiar?
I'm sorry, I assume that people know things. My bad. Like it's not even. I'm not even. I'm not
I'm
even
I
being terrible.
no. I think it's something some folks are probably familiar with, but if
No,
they aren't familiar with it, they'd be
no,
interested. So totally, it would be
I'm
great to hear
sorry.
from you. You're
I
good.
appreciate that for getting me to circle back. Um, So the American Association for the Advancement of Science is a nonprofit organization in Washington, D.C. It's been around for a very long time. And if you think about them, think about, I think science, the journal, think of science. But they have several different types of fellowships that either introduce scientists to policy or transition you into the policy space. And one of those is the Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. And so what it is that uh, there are agencies across each branch of the government. Wait, are there some judicial branch? Maybe I don't know if they have. Maybe they do. I know they have fellowships in the legislative branch and the executive branch. And if they do have some, I don't know if they have any in the other branch of government. If they do, maybe just one. But essentially, so for example, I was in the executive branch, and so I applied and my application focused on, oh, there is one. Okay, yeah. Okay. Because I feel like that's something like relatively recent. I wasn't checking for them when I was applying. I don't even know if they had it available when I was applying. But so I was a part of the executive branch. And as I shared earlier, my interests were in minority health, health disparities, women's health. Um, and so I tailored my resume highlighting my interests. And there are several different agencies that then wanted to interview with me. And so I had interviews at NIH, at USAID, at NSF, so National Science Foundation, Veteran Affairs, and I'm trying to remember who else. But then you go through the interview process, and then there's a matching process that happens. And then, at least with the executive branch, you're in your office for 1 to 2 years. Sometimes you'll have a specific project you're focusing on. Other times you have the leverage to build your project. Um, but yeah, it's essentially a way to introduce you into the federal government. If you're a
Ah,
scientist, with a PhD or an engineer with a master's.
that's great to know. Thank you for that overview. I think those fellowships are so incredible, and I'm sure that would be a great step for anybody on the call. Yeah, no, did you have something to add?
Yeah, here, hold up. You know what? Here, that's the link to it. Uh, there's a really accessible fellowship program that I'm pretty sure like Donna's had some students go into. I've had a lot of students go into it. It's been renamed the NOS Fellowship, but it's been around for a while. And uh, it it really prides itself on taking inner students from a lot of different disciplines to do policy work, and especially for water. So yeah, have at it.
Thanks. I get that's a selfish plug. The position that I have is through the Canals Fellowship. So yeah, I haven't started it yet. I start in a couple weeks, February 1st, but I'm really excited for the opportunity. And if anybody has questions about it, I'm happy to chat with you along the way.
I feel like we probably get a grad from one of our schools in, almost like one a year into that program. So this is not like, oh my gosh, we'll never, I mean, yeah, I think we'd be disappointed if they had an incoming class and there wasn't anybody from one of our Wayne State programs.
Yeah. I will say from what I've heard, Wayne State has had higher success than some of the other universities in Michigan as well. So I think there's a lot to be said about the work that's being done at our school and how well it applies for that if you have an interest in freshwater. Um, but time is just shooting by. Maggie, you had your hand up earlier. If you want to unmute and ask your question, you're more than welcome to.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So as you saw, we're mostly undergrads and grad students. So I was wondering if you could briefly share maybe an aspect of either maybe your time in undergrad or grad school that maybe like something you participated in, or maybe skills you acquired, or maybe skills you wish you had acquired that were helpful or would have been helpful to you in your career now.
Oh, my experience of things like a quilt, which is different patches that make up who I am as a professional now. So like for example, in undergrad, um, like I worked 3 jobs that had nothing to do with animal science or vet school, but I also volunteered because, well, one, I needed money, and two, I wanted to make sure that, okay, is this what I want to do? Turns out it wasn't, and so like I had to pivot, and so it wasn't at least at that stage, there wasn't necessarily a skill set that I thought that I was lacking, but I think it would have been helpful to be more confident in the fact that I didn't want to go in a certain direction. So trying to force myself into a direction, I should have just listened to myself. And as in terms of graduate school, again, like I don't necessarily think there's anything I was, as an individual, anything that I lacked. It's like you have to be flexible because there are instances, like you probably know this already, where it's like you may have an idea of where your project is going to go, and so you need alternatives to test if it doesn't go that way, and recognizing that's not a failure on your part as an individual. And I think one of the best things my PI said to me back in the day was, stand next to your data, not in front of it. Like it's not up to me to defend it. Like if it's clean, true data, I don't have to defend it. Like this is what it is. And so that, kind of helped shape my mindset as an early stage, investigator. And then in terms of who I was as a postdoc, and it's interesting too, because it's going back to so cultivating my confidence, because like even though I accomplished so many things, I still got to NIH and I was like, oh no, maybe I'm not supposed to be here. It's like, why would I think that? There's no reason to think that. And people talk a lot about imposter syndrome and how it doesn't necessarily go away. And it's like you know that intellectually, but when you're still in a space with all of these academic achievers who they didn't have to work 3 jobs, they didn't come from like I'm from the hood. They didn't come from the hood. They don't know what it means to have to scrape by to build what you want out of something, at least in that capacity. And so I would say it's more so it's not necessarily the technical skills. It's more of maturing as an emotional being in a highly technical field and recognizing that I am deserving of having a safe space to grow and develop.
That's awesome, Calais. Thank you for sharing that. Noah, do you want to share anything to Maggie's question?
Nothing at all, like nothing. I way more narrow than how Callie was viewing it. Actually, my experience was in some ways like really traditional. The most, I mean, I remember it perfectly. The defining thing that helped me figure out why I was in school and what I wanted to get to work doing was basically a I don't know, a side project or internship for Bunyan Bryant, who was starting this field of environmental justice, and he had gotten a call from some folks who lived in Romulus near the airport who were opposing a deep well injection, hazardous waste deep well injection, kind of the intersection in 94 and 275. I remember they had this horrible name called Recap, Romulus Environmentalists Care About People. this is like 1992. And I don't remember what the internship or project was, but I don't really remember any details of it because there weren't any. Bunyan just said, like, you know, they're meeting, you know, a Wednesday night at the church in their neighborhood, you know, go to work. And what he meant by that was really sort of show up and just listen and just like sit with that, just, you know, just come and just sit with them and just listen and just yeah, just eventually learn enough to make yourself useful and get to work. And that's super vague, like not, it's almost the exact opposite of like a lot of your experience. And it's, and again, it might be more typical of law that it's just a much more free-for-all world of, you know, just show up and get involved. And next thing you know, it wasn't super quick, but it did happen pretty quickly that I went from not knowing why I was going there to that becoming my job, of groups like that calling me, and that's what I did. So it wasn't really that, it was in some ways really straightforward and linear, but yeah. Maybe it's also just credit to Bunyan Bryant. I mean, the dude, he was incredible. And he had a way of making really big, complicated issues seem simple and even peaceful. I think he's writing an autobiography.
I hope to read it. He sounds like an incredible person. Well,
But
thank you for
internships, I know it's super boring. And actually, I'd echo another thing that Callie said that's really boring, but I thought really important, mechanical. Like, think about what you want to be doing and be a little, be mechanical, build the support, the tools you need. Even, you know, the way we as teachers assign the work, you know, of think about the resources that you're going to need to get this job done. And if you don't have them, step one is get the resource that you're going to need to do the next step. So if you don't know, if you don't have the connections right now, build those connections. If it's a skill that you don't have, build, you know, think about what you need to be building to do what you want to do, and it'll happen because you're super brilliant and capable. That's what happens.
Thank you, Noah. I think on that note, I know we had some folks on this call today who are interested in maybe following up with either of you. Would you both, Noah and Calais, be okay with us sharing your email address if people want to follow up?
I'll
perfect.
share once my information's updated.
Hold
if
on,
that's
I
Sounds
missed
good.
mine. Let's see if I could undo that. It is, whoops.
Yeah, we can, I should say, we'll do it this way. Participants, if you are on the call right now and you'd be interested in reaching out to either of these two, please drop your email in the chat and we'll share those details with you when we can.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Believe it or not, my Wayne State email is actually the best way to get me. I'm like old enough that I still check my Wayne State email every day.
that's
I'll put in a final plug since you got like one more minute. It's probably too late this semester, although not really. I teach a course called Environmental Law and Policy in the Environmental Science and Geology Department. It's ESG 5700. It is very interdisciplinary. It is it's a pretty chill class. It's really intended to give a wide range of students, exactly like you guys, some exposure to environmental law and help you on your way to what you want to learn from it. So consider it. It's a good, I don't know. It's weird when you plug your own, you know, your own product, but it's not really that. I'm not like trying to sell you anything. You've already paid to be in school here. So it's not even like a feature I'm selling, like an upcharge. It's the same price as any other class. But I wouldn't say which class to not take and take mine instead. So I don't really know. I don't actually, well, I don't really like to tell people what to do. But anyway, I teach a class. If you're interested in taking the class, take the class. Otherwise, there's a lot of other good classes to take. Take anything.
Noah, you're
I've heard,
delightful.
yeah, I've heard from students that this class is cool and that sometimes you bring snacks. So that would convince me to take it.
That is true. This year it's online. I used to cook for the students
Ah,
and bring them food, but
that's all right.
all right.
Still worth it. Well, yes, that takes us right to 5. But thank you both so much for spending the time today. I think this has been a really great discussion, and we just so appreciate you sharing all your wisdom and all the things that we can learn from you both. So
Thanks.
yeah,
Thank you
It's
for
great
having
seeing
me.
this group. I'm so glad this group exists at Wayne State. This is awesome.
yeah, we would love to, support you both in whatever we can. We're a diverse group of students. You have, like you said, a lot of different expertise. But if anything ever comes across your desk, Nova, that we could be of service to, please let us know. And Calais, same to you. I don't know if anything ever, if you need a group of passionate people in Detroit, we're your people.
That's right.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
guys. Have a
awesome.
good
Thank
rest
you
of your week,
all.
guys. Have a
You
good semester
too.
this term. See you guys.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining. Bye.